You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, we have some major news here about another Trump-aligned lawyer. That's Stefan Passantino. He's now at risk of being disbarred. Can you explain what happened here?
So this lawyer, Stefan Passantino, who used to work for the Trump White House, at one point was hired, but not by Cassidy Hutchinson to represent Cassidy Hutchinson, but was hired by Trump World, a Trump-aligned PAC, to swoop in and not so much represent Cassidy Hutchinson's interest, but to basically try to protect Donald Trump's interest. And what I can tell you, Brian, is one of the cardinal sins as a lawyer is you are duty bound to represent your client's interests and represent them zealously. You can never have even dual loyalties to somebody else where you're representing the interests of somebody else. And what became apparent through the reporting and through Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony before the J6 committee is Stan Passantino was hired by Trump World to protect Donald Trump.
Now, is it legal for a lawyer, namely Passantino, to pressure a client to remain loyal to Trump, who's a third party in all of this, versus just telling the truth during her testimony? Like, according to Hutchinson, Passantino's advice was to say as little to the panel as possible, and that was accompanied by assurances that she would get, quote, a really good job in Trump World.
Yeah, it's a great question because some of what Passantino did was perhaps simply unethical, but then other things that he did that we now know he did because of Hutchinson's testimony were pretty clearly illegal. So part of what he did is, for example, when Cassidy Hutchinson said, look, I'm very close with Tony Ornato, and Tony told me that Trump tried to strangle the limo driver when he refused to take him to the Capitol. And Cassidy Hutchinson said, her lawyer, Stefan Passantino, said, no, we're not going to talk about that. We need to focus on protecting Donald Trump. That will make an ethical lawyer's head explode, because to directly answer your question, he was suborning perjury. He was urging Cassidy Hutchinson not to testify fully and truthfully to the J6 committee. That is suborning perjury. That is obstructing an official congressional proceeding. It is potentially contempt of Congress. You know, there are a whole host of criminal offenses that I actually believe, based on what we learned through Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony, Jack Smith must be digging into and considering charging Stefan Passantino criminally. Of course, today we're talking about the fact that a group of prominent lawyers are seeking to have him investigated and ultimately disbarred for being an unethical lawyer.
Okay, here's what I'm having trouble wrapping my head around. I guess on the legality front, how is it okay for a lawyer who's representing his client, who's Cassidy Hutchinson here, but also whose legal fees were paid for by a different client, and that is Trump's super PAC, as you mentioned, or Trump's political action committee, to basically harm his first client for the benefit of that third party, like to harm Hutchinson, because this is going to do harm to her, all in deference to Trump? Like, how is that okay just in legal world?
It's not okay in legal world. And I think that's why you see this complaint that was just filed with the DC bar, signed by, I think, 35 prominent lawyers. They are past presidents of the DC bar, past presidents of the American Bar Association, you know, some of our nation's best legal scholars. They are former attorneys general from various states. I mean, these are, you know, heavy hitters in the legal circles. It's not only not okay, some of what he did may very well be criminal. Now, when you talk about what happens if somebody else is paying your legal fees, that's fine. Listen, if I'm in trouble and somebody else wants to pay my attorney's fees, they can do that as long as they fully disclose it to me, and as long as I am assured that regardless of where the money's coming from, the lawyer is only looking out for my interest. But that was not what Stefan Passantino was doing. He was being paid by Trump World, and he was looking out for the interests of Donald Trump. And here's how it came to a head in one of the ugliest ways, Brian. At one point, Cassidy Hutchinson was advised by Pasentino, you know what? Why don't you just consider defying the congressional subpoena? First of all, That is urging a lawyer to have the client commit the crime of contempt of Congress. But here's the kicker. Passentino told Cassidy Hutchinson, you know what? Mark Meadows defied a congressional subpoena. Dan Scavino defied a congressional subpoena, and they never got indicted for contempt of Congress. So I'm advising you as your lawyer to do the same. A lawyer cannot advise a client to commit a crime. But, that illustrates, one, just how unethical Passentino was, and two, just how damaging it is when the Department of Justice decides to forego bringing criminal charges against high government officials like Meadows and Scavino when they inarguably committed the crime of contempt of Congress.
Now, him having done that, I know that he's at risk of being disbarred based on all of this, but is he at risk of basically any further legal trouble for trying to, influence her testimony or get her to do something illegal?
Based on Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony to the January 6th committee, assuming it to be true and assuming that prosecutors could corroborate it with other evidence, and I think anybody who eyeballed Miss Hutchinson, that brave young woman, would probably come to the conclusion that she was absolutely telling the truth.
Yeah.
If it can be corroborated, I would bet $1. That's my betting limit. I'm not a high roller. I would bet $1 that you will see Stefan Passantino's name on a conspiracy indictment together with some of Donald Trump's other corrupt lawyers.
Glenn, can you speak on the fact that this guy was the White House ethics lawyer for Trump?
That is the death of irony, isn't it? Although, you know what? Isn't this exactly who you would expect Donald Trump to want as his ethics lawyer, one of his many Roy Cohens, right? And he had Michael Cohen for a period of time doing his kind of dirty work for him, being his fixer. And at some point, at least Michael Cohen made a break and decided to get on the straight and narrow and actually provide evidence against Donald Trump. But yeah, Stefan Passantino being an ethics lawyer is a stone cold joke.
On that note, can you kind of expand on the other Trump-linked lawyers, fixers, acolytes who basically traded away their jobs or even their freedom all for blind loyalty to Donald Trump?
Yeah, impossible for this old career lawyer, career prosecutor to understand why lawyers would throw their bar licenses away in service to Donald Trump. But that's what Rudy Giuliani did. It's what Sidney Powell did. It's what John Eastman did. It is what Jeffrey Clark, a former DOJ high government official who joined Donald Trump's conspiracy to overturn the results of the presidential election, Jeffrey Clark threw his bar license away. And then let's face it, we have other White House counsel who it's still an open question as to whether they're going to continue to be permitted to practice law. Because remember, White House counsel Pat Cipollone and White House deputy counsel Pat Philbin also testified in the grand jury about some of Donald Trump's crimes. Now, we don't quite know if Cipollone and Philbin kind of got in front of all of the potential liability that all of these other attorneys did not get in front of. That remains to be seen. But lawyer after lawyer after lawyer, to this day, the Evan Corcorans and the Christina Bobbs and the Epsteins, there are so many lawyers who seem to be willing to just surrender their law license by doing Donald Trump's corrupt bidding.
Yeah. Okay, so let's finish off with this. What's the timeline here for Stefan Passantino? What's next on this whole disbarment front?
Yeah, so there will be an investigation launched by the DC Bar Council that will take some time, and Passantino will have some full, robust rights to, cross-examine witnesses against him through his lawyers and present his own evidence and make his arguments that what he did was not really unethical. And even if it was, it doesn't deserve disbarment. Maybe it deserves a lesser sanction, a reprimand, a suspension for a period of 6 months or a year from the practice of law. So I suspect this is going to take a few months to play out, but it will probably move a lot more quickly than we have been seeing the criminal investigations of Donald Trump moving.
Yeah, well, couldn't get a lot slower than that. So with that said, we'll keep on top of all of this stuff, especially with regard to Stefan Passantino. If you want to continue to keep up with this legal news, make sure to subscribe to both of our channels. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.